Hey guys, hoping all is well with everyone and wishing all of you a very blessed and prosperous Happy New Year. In this video, we're going to be continuing our read along of The Secret Zoo, The Final Fight. And last time we finished, we completed Chapter 13, so we'll be starting off with Chapter 14 today. And if this is your guys' first time visiting my channel, I'd like to formally welcome you, and I hope you enjoy the content that you see. Without further ado, let's jump into it. Chapter 14, The Capture. As soon as Noah walked through the portal into his closet, a loud squeal erupted in his ear, and he yanked out his headset. Sam did the same. Someone was jamming the radio waves. Marlowe, who'd been on Noah's shoulder, flew into the main part of the bedroom and touched down on the windowsill. Before Noah could react, Sam grabbed his arm and ordered him to be quiet. They crept out into the bedroom. Noah's heart dropped when he saw that the dim light from the first floor was filling the upstairs hall. "Sam?" Noah whispered. "I see." Noah turned his attention to his bed. The mirage wasn't working. The chameleons were gone, and so was the pile of clothes he'd stuffed beneath his covers. He took a step toward the door, but Sam grabbed his arm, stopping him again. The two stared out into the dimly lit hall, listening for sounds. After a few seconds, Noah heard something. Footsteps coming from downstairs. Noah flinched as something ran across his foot. He looked down and saw a chameleon, one from the mirage, crawl beneath his bed. "Follow me," Sam whispered. The descenders slowly walked across the room. At the door, more sounds came from downstairs, floorboards creaking in the kitchen, and a low growl like that of a distant animal. Noah could smell something that didn't belong, the pungent, earthy odor of the air after a storm, and of things that have gotten wet, and something else. Noah thought for a few seconds and then realized what it was. Disease. Sam got Noah's attention and pointed to a firefly on Noah's shoulder. Then he grabbed the winged insect before its light could shine and gently placed it in a pocket in Noah's jacket. Noah nodded and then buttoned the pocket. Sam led the way into the hall, his footsteps slow and cautious. When the two reached Megan's room and faced her open door, panic washed over Noah. The dim moonlight revealed that Megan's dresser was turned over, and her bedsheets were lying on the floor. The mirror above her desk was shattered, and moonlight was reflecting off the shards of glass. "No," Noah said, and he took a step away from the scene. The room started to spin, and Sam squeezed his arm hard. In another time, at another place, it might have hurt, but Noah barely felt it. His fears spiked as he thought of his parents. He pulled away from Sam, turned, and took 2 steps into the room on the other side of the hall. More signs of a struggle. An overturned desk, and books lying open on the carpet. His mother and father were gone. This is our fault," Noah said. "Sam, we should have been here." Again, Noah noticed the strange smell of moist air and sickness. He heard another distant grunt, and then something else, a faint caw, like that of a large bird. Something was downstairs. "Noah," Sam said, "keep quiet. We don't..." Noah's attention went to another sound, footsteps on the stairs. Before he could warn Sam, someone slammed into the descender and drove him down the hall, out of sight. Then the house shook as the 2 bodies slammed into the wall. The sounds of the fight were amplified in the tight confines of the hallway, and then there was silence. Noah stood in his parents' room and stared out into this limited view of the hall, all this attention on the silence, which seemed to stretch on and on. "Sam?" he eventually uttered. A nearby floorboard groaned, and someone stepped into the open doorway. A man with long, lanky arms and a messy mop of hair. Through his face was a hidden in shadow. Noah could tell who it was. Charlie Red. Something swooped down and struck Charlie's neck. Marlowe. When the kingfisher attacked a second time, Charlie batted him away. "Marlowe!" Noah called out. Charlie smiled a wicked smile. Then he pounced on Noah, put him in a headlock, and pulled him out of the room. As Noah was dragged down the hall, He saw Sam lying on the floor, seemingly unconscious, and Marlowe struggling to fly. Noah's heels banged down the steps, and then Charlie threw him to the floor of the living room. Air gushed out of Noah's chest, and his side erupted in pain as he was kicked once, twice, 3 times. He rolled onto his stomach and tried to crawl away. "Where are you going?" Charlie said. Charlie's foot connected with Noah's knee, and fresh pain erupted in his leg. As Noah spun onto his back, the bottom of Charlie's foot came down on his throat, and the air of the world was suddenly 1,000,000 miles away. Noah felt something wedged between him and the ground and realized it was the backpack. He was still wearing it. He immediately pulled the cords on his shoulder straps, and the tail sprang out of the pack, catapulting Noah into the air and knocking over Charlie Red. Noah stumbled and leaned against a wall for support, his breath coming in gasps. He smelled the earthy smell, stronger than ever, and then he felt something. Wind. He looked into the kitchen and saw that there were these things were coming from. A portal in the outside wall of his house. Wind from the secret zoo was blowing the curtain around, revealing glimpses of the city of species, dark and stormy, just like Noah had seen from the window in the Institute of Light. DeGraff had built another portal to Noah's house. As Noah turned to face Charlie, his tail dragged along the floor and whacked the wall behind him. Objects fell and shattered, the knickknacks Mr. Darby had used in his example of the multipoint. Charlie stood in the dim light, and Noah realized something horrifying about the zoo security guard. He was taller than ever, and his arms were freakishly long, his hands dangling down by his knees. DeGraff's magic was continuing to change Charlie, just like the Sasquatches and the other animals. "Why are you doing this?" Noah said, still gasping for air. "The world has lost order, kid. It needs a new king, a new way of thinking." "DeGraff's a lunatic," Noah said. "He ruined Mr. Darby." "You mean Mr. Jackson?" Charlie said, and Noah could see his smile. Poor Frederick, and only a boy. But look on the bright side. His mother wasn't around to miss him." Noah balled his hands into fists. He wanted to lash out at Charlie Red, to strike and fight, like a descender. "They'll all die, of course," Charlie said. "Your friends, I mean. Those who refuse to," he raised his sickening long arms into the light, "change. Your sister, that stubborn brat, she'll certainly be one of them." "We'll beat you," Noah said. "We'll fight, and in the end? The end? You mean tonight at midnight?" Noah stared at Charlie, unsure what to think. Then he glanced at the clock and saw it was already 10:27. Charlie noticed his interest and said, "Go ahead, set your watch, kid. We storm your world at exactly 12 o'clock. You're lying. Why would you tell me?" "To watch you squirm, kid," Charlie answered. "There's nothing you can do to stop us." Noah exploded with rage. He swung his tail like he had in the Institute of Light, and it dragged along the wall, crushing the plaster. Charlie ducked, and the tail passed over his head and smashed an armoire to pieces. Noah whipped his tail back around, this time connecting with Charlie and batting him across the room. Charlie rolled, jumped to his feet, and faced Noah again. Drywall dust swirled in the dim light. "You took my parents!" Noah shouted. "My sister!" Charlie glanced at the curtain, which was still blowing around as wind from another world forced its way into Noah's kitchen. "We were disappointed to not find you here, kid, but we're glad to see you back." "We." Charlie wasn't alone, and just as Noah had his thought, 3 people stepped through the portal, 3 hulking figures, silhouettes in the dark kitchen. They lumbered over to Noah, their hands swinging by their knees. These were the men, Noah realized, who had dragged his family into the city of species. Now they were coming for him. Noah turned and attacked, but his tail became wedged against the wall. 3 men pounced on him. "The backpack!" Get his backpack! Noah, still standing, was yanked one way and then another. Someone pulled the cords on his shoulder straps, and his tail slammed against him as it retracted into his pack. Then his descender gear was stripped away. Hold him, Charlie said. We're trying, one of his attackers called out in a deep, throaty voice, the monstrous voice of a creature that was no longer quite human. Noah felt the crook of an arm press against his throat as he was put into another headlock. A fist connected with his stomach, and then air rushed out of him. He wheezed as he took a breath. Then he stopped fighting before another blow could come. Charlie's shadow moved across the floor. His unnaturally long, lanky frame made him look like a comic book villain. Just then, the curtain opened and someone walked into Noah's world. DeGraff. He moved across the kitchen, his long trench coat beating against his heels and blowing across like a cape. He stopped directly beside Noah, his face just inches away, and Noah felt his warm, moist breath on his cheeks. Hello, boy. His voice rumbled in his throat, revealing again how his fleshy insides were decaying. You got the other one, right? DeGraff said to Charlie. The girl? Charlie nodded. And a couple bonuses. His parents, they got in the way. The idea of Charlie putting his filthy hands on Noah's mother and father, dragging them across the floor, sickened Noah. He struggled to get loose from his captors, but it was no use. Noah turned his attention back to DeGraff and saw the horrific details of his face. His missing nose and top lip, his black gum line and broken teeth, the empty sockets of his eyes. DeGraff, a creature from a nightmare. Are you scared, boy? DeGraff asked. No, Noah said, but the lie was obvious. You won't win. Not in the end. I always win. Ask your friend, the old man. Mr. Darby's stronger than you think, Noah said. Look at him. He built the secret zoo. No, boy, DeGraff said. I built the secret zoo. Darby was my pawn, and so was his child. Noah filled with new anger. He imagined Frederick's chubby cheeks and warm eyes, a boy brought to life in Mr. Darby's stories. He thought of Frederick's good heart, his compassion for the animals. If Noah had been born 100 years ago, the two of them might have been friends. You killed him, Noah said. People die all the time, for different reasons. Noah continued to shake his head. You're sick. Evil. DeGraff chuckled, and it was a nauseating sound, a gurgle of watery phlegm. I'm a leader, boy. Leaders understand the necessity of sacrifice, even when it's the life of a child. Noah shook his head again. How could someone believe such a thing? And speaking of sacrifice, DeGraff said. He nodded toward the three men, and a second later Noah's legs were swept out from beneath him, and he fell to the floor. Take him to his family, the shadowist said, as he stepped aside to clear a path to the curtain. Two of the men grabbed Noah's ankles and began to pull him along the floor. Noah, on his back, reached out and grabbed a leg of the couch. He needed to get to his family, but not like this. Not without the help of Mr. Darby and the Descenders. His hand slipped off the couch, and then his body banged against the frame of the open doorway to the kitchen. Do something, a voice inside him said. Do something or you and your family are finished. He felt a cold breeze, and he looked to see the curtain flapping in the wind from the city of species. A dark, dreary place that had once been filled with color and movement and a better magic. A place that had once been filled with light and hope. His thoughts stopped. Light. He remembered the firefly Sam had caught upstairs, and he remembered the way light had hurt DeGraff in the secret chamber of lights. As he was dragged along, he unbuttoned his jacket pocket and softly closed his hand around the still captive insect. Hold it, the voice said inside of him. Hold it for as long as you can. The curtain was barely 10 feet away. Knowing he needed time for the light to build, he reached out with his free hand and grabbed the leg of the kitchen table. He stopped sliding for a few seconds. Then the man holding him realized what was happening and pulled him away. The heat against his palm grew more and more intense. It felt like he was holding the tip of a match. He was dragged closer and closer to the portal. 8 feet, 7 feet, 6. The curtain continued to flap open, revealing the red eyes of the animals on the streets. Someone started to laugh, and Noah knew by the sick sound that it was DeGraff. He checked his hand, saw light seeping from between his fingers, and hoped no one would notice. Don't let go. Accept the pain. And then his inner voice said something that surprised him. Pain is part of what makes a descender strong. But he wasn't a descender. At least not yet. Just as the men who were dragging Noah were about to step through the portal, the curtain swept open and a large animal flew into the room, plowing into the men and knocking them over. The animal lost control, struck the floor, and slid into the dim light, revealing there were actually 2 animals. One was a penguin, a large emperor penguin, Podgy, and then Noah realized the second figure wasn't an animal at all. It was a young girl with pigtails and eyeglasses that somehow hadn't fallen off in the crash. Megan. Noah, free from the clutches of the men, jumped to his feet. The pain in his hand was worse than ever, but he needed to hold on longer. He only had 1 firefly, and only 1 chance to make this work. Get them, DeGraff commanded. All of them. The men nodded and stood, looked at Podgy, and seemed to register what had just happened. Megan and Podgy moved behind the kitchen table. One of the men pointed to Noah and said, His hand. What's wrong with his hand? Noah looked down. His fingers were glowing orange. Meg, Noah said, close your eyes. Hurry. Get them. DeGraff bellowed. His panicky voice gurgled out of his throat. The 3 men charged, 2 at Noah and Megan, and Podgy. Noah swiftly raised his arm and uncurled his fingers, and a blindly burst of white light filled the room. As Noah closed his eyes, he heard Charlie, the men, and DeGraff howl in pain. An idea struck him. Someone had jammed the radio waves, but there were other ways to communicate with the crossers. With his eyes still closed, he ran into the living room, his arms out in front of him, his hands feeling the way. Something soft touched his fingers, the drapes over the large window in the front of his house. He quickly threw them open, allowing the bright light to spill out into the street. Someone suddenly tackled him, and then Noah struck the floor. He instinctively opened his eyes. The firefly was already dimming. Noah could make out the walls, the ceiling, a chandelier, and Charlie Red hovering over him. I got him, Charlie said. Just kill him, DeGraff instructed. With pleasure. Noah noticed something. The freckles on Charlie's face weren't so splotchy, and his eyes had lost their redness. Then Charlie tried to grab Noah. They were both shocked when his hands didn't reach. Somehow his arms weren't so supernaturally long. Charlie glanced at his hands, confused. Then he arched his back and howled in pain. Noah didn't understand until he looked past Charlie and saw Solana standing at the back and at the front door with her right hand down by her left knee. She just pitched a handful of quills into Charlie's back. Hands squeezed past Solana, then a second descender, a third, more and more. The descenders on the patrol were responding to the bright light, Noah's call for help. Charlie ran from the room and into the kitchen. Noah didn't have to see him to know where he was going, the portal to the secret zoo. The descenders rushed after him. Seconds later, a descender stepped back into the living room saying, He's gone. There were others, Noah said. DeGraff. Gone too, the descender said. He looked at Hannah and asked, Should we go after them? Don't, Megan said. Not yet. They might be waiting on the other side. Another trap. Hannah considered the situation for a few seconds, and then shook her head. Get Mr. Darby. Take the portal in Noah's room. The descender nodded. Then he rushed up the stairs and he was gone. Noah closed his eyes and softly shook his head. DeGraff had escaped. Again. And this time, he'd taken Noah's parents. Chapter 15. The Mods. Here, Solana said. Wrap it in this. Noah took the damp towel she held out to him and wrapped it around the red, blistering wound in the palm of his hand. Solana sat beside Noah, and the two leaned against his living room wall. How bad is it? Someone asked. Noah looked up and saw Mr. Darby, who had just been retrieved from the Institute of Light. Not bad, Noah said. Solana shook her head. It's bad. Noah looked around and saw the people and animals gathered around him. Someone had come off perimeter patrol, and some had come from the Institute of Light. He saw Specters, Descenders, prairie dogs, and Podgy. Someone had retrieved Blizzard from the shed, and now the polar bear was stretched out across the living room, his big head resting in Noah's lap. Sam, conscious again, was standing and leaning against the wall for support. A large black box with rows of knobs, buttons, and dials sat in the one corner of the room. An RF jammer, a device that blocked radio frequencies. Charlie or one of his goons had brought it, and it was why Noah's headset hadn't worked. As soon as the RF jammer was turned off, Noah had used his headset to check on Ella and Richie, and was relieved to find out that they hadn't been attacked. Noah briefed them on what had happened and then told them, and Evie and Tank, to be on high alert. Now Noah craned his neck to try to see through the doorway into the kitchen. Can you see? Mr. Darby asked. Noah shook his head. Lily, Mr. Darby said. The wall is in his way. Help him out, please. Lily unzipped a pocket on her cargo pants, and chameleons began to climb out, one after another. They streamed down her leg, crawled across the floor, and then clambered up the wall, their tiny claws puncturing the plaster. Dozens crawled through the open doorway to get to the other side of the wall. Then, as they spread out, the wall slowly seemed to disappear. But Noah knew what was really happening. The chameleons were blending the wall into the surroundings, which, from Noah's perspective, happened to be the kitchen and the people in it. In a matter of seconds, the wall between the kitchen and the living room appeared to be gone. Better? Mr. Darby asked. Noah nodded. 6 Descenders were guarding the portal to the City of Species. Dozens of Tarsiers, who had followed the Descenders into Noah's house, oftentimes clinging to their clothes, were perched along the kitchen furniture, countertop, and cabinets, surveying the scene with their big, bulging eyes. The curtain was still blowing in the wind from the City of Species, revealing glimpses of the dark streets. Megan was standing off to one side, wiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand while Alakshi tried to console her. She just shared the story of her escape from DeGraff. Podgy had flown in from the treetops, knocked over the security guard from who was holding her captive, and flown off again, this time with Megan clinging to his back. He'd headed straight for the portal to Megan's kitchen. My parents, Noah said as he stared at the portal. This is my fault. Noah, Mr. Darby said. You can't. I can, Noah said, suddenly angry. I've known what's been going on for more than a year, and I never warned them. At my request, Mr. Darby said. If anyone should harbor the blame, then let it be me. I endangered parents, Noah, not you. Noah shook his head. In truth, it didn't matter whose fault it was. All that mattered was that his parents were gone, captured by a lunatic and taken to another world that was quickly falling to darkness. Noah checked at the clock. 10:37. Then he said, Charlie told me that DeGraff is planning to attack at midnight tonight. They're coming for my world. Mr. Darby became quiet. He glanced at Solana, Sam, Hannah. Then I'm glad we're already taking action. Just as Noah was about to ask what Mr. Darby meant, Zach walked down the stairs. He'd come from the portal in Noah's closet. The Technical had a big, full sack slung over his shoulder, reminding Noah of a bizarre Santa Claus, one with a mohawk, dirty overalls, and a tank top. Zach winked as he stepped into the room and dropped the sack, startling Blizzard. "Here you go, Mr. D." Mr. Darby looked down at the sack and combed his fingers through his beard. "They're ready?" "As ready as they'll ever be." "And the primary portal?" "Almost. My techs are working non-stop." "Almost isn't good enough," Mr. Darby said. He nodded toward the portal in the kitchen. "It has to be now." Noah said, What are you guys talking about?" Zach reached into the sack and pulled out a disc the size of his palm. "This, a magic modifier. We call them mods." Noah glanced at Solana, and it was obvious that she didn't understand either. "Tell them," Mr. Darby said. Zach held up the mod. "They recalibrate the magic in the curtains. All you have to do is press this button." He showed them the button, but didn't touch it, and a signal goes out, transforming the magic into any gateway within a quarter mile. Those gateways will open to wherever the primary portal is placed. Noah stared at the mod and remembered the example Mr. Darby had shown him with the knickknacks, 3 pieces of velvet magically connected to a single point. "The multi-point," Noah said. Mr. Darby nodded. "Think of a bunch of doors that open to a single room. All we have to do is place the mods and activate the primary portal." "Are you sure it will work?" Noah asked. Zach nodded. Then he shrugged. Then he nodded again. "It's never been performed on a large scale, Noah," Mr. Darby explained. "We just tested in our labs. What I showed you with the knickknacks." He turned to Zach and added, "We need to place them as soon as possible. Noah learned that DeGraff is sending his army at midnight." "Midnight?" Mr. Darby nodded. Zach's stare went blank as he considered something for a moment. Then he said, "The mods are ready, but like I said, my techs are still finishing up the primary portal." "Then tell them to hurry." Mr. Darby glanced around the room, adding, "I'll need volunteers to place the mods. We need one in every exhibit at the Clarksville Zoo, and we need them scattered throughout the neighborhood to take care of any new portals that DeGraff may have created, like the one in the school. Keep them away from Noah's house." He pointed to the curtain in the kitchen. "We need that portal to continue working like it is. Same for the portal in Noah's closet." Sarah, one of the Specters, raised her hand. "I think we're the obvious choice," she said. "The Specters can get across the neighborhood and the Clarksville Zoo undetected." "Agreed," Mr. Darby said. "You'll have to be fast." "I can help," Solana said. "No," Sarah quickly spoke up. "We can do this alone." Solana jumped to her feet. "Mr. Darby, we have little more than an hour before—" "I said no! Sarah, you're not—" Mr. Darby waved a hand out in front of him, as if battering their argument out of the air. "Enough! Now isn't the time to continue this squabble." Noah glanced at Sarah and Solana. He'd seen the tension between the Specters and Descenders for a long time, but he didn't understand it. He was tired of not knowing. "What's going on between you?" he asked. Sarah, still staring at Solana, tipped her head Noah's way and said, "Tell him." Solana stared to say something, but then stopped. She looked at Noah out of the corner of her eye. "Tell me," Noah said. "I want to know." Solana shook her head, and for a few seconds, Noah was sure she'd stay quiet. But then he gazed at the floor by her feet and started talking. Years ago, a few Specters found out that some Descenders were using their powers to rob homes just outside the city of Species. When the Descenders learned that the Specters were going to turn them in, they captured all the Specters they could, dragged them into the grottos, and pushed them through a portal that they knew went amiss. Evie, Sarah, Lily, the 6 Specters you've met, they were the only ones to escape. Solana became quiet and continued to stare at the floor, clearly ashamed. Sarah stood with her arms crossed and her eyes full of accusation. Noah, knowing that people who went a miss, basically disappeared, asked the question that seemed the most critical. Did you go after them? Pointless, Mr. Darby said. It was a faulty portal, and no one ever returned from it. The portal was ordered to be taken down. I can only hope that the lost Specters are safe, able to pick up their lives in whatever place they are in. Sarah suddenly turned to Mr. Darby and said, Send us, me and the girls. We'll find them. Noah could tell by her sharp tone that this wasn't the first time she and Mr. Darby had had this conversation. It's not safe. It wouldn't... And what is safe? She glanced around the room. This? I've been doing unsafe things for as long as I can remember. Mr. Darby stayed quiet for a long time. Then he frowned and said, Sarah, it might be time to let them go. In your heart. They were my friends, Sarah said, her voice breaking with emotion. My family. I know, Mr. Darby said, and I'm sorry, but the portal is closed. The curtain, it's gone. So let's put it back up. Sarah glanced at Zach and added, He can recalibrate it. Perhaps, Mr. Darby said, but the risk of more life. I'm not concerned about that. I know, but I am. I have to be. If I wouldn't be fit to lead the secret zoo. Sarah started to say something more, but stopped. She glanced at Solana and Mr. Darby, and then took a step back, her arms still crossed. And now, Mr. Darby continued, in the way of leadership, I'm ordering you to take Solana with you into the Clarksville Zoo. Sarah rolled her eyes, but stayed quiet. After a few seconds, the Specters began to gather. Sarah, Lily, Alakshi, Jordan, Kalina, all except for Evie, who was still with Ella. They began to fill the normal pockets on their cargo pants with the mods. As Noah watched the Specters prepare, he thought of everything that had happened that night. He thought of his parents and the way their bedroom had looked. He remembered being dragged across the floor. Then he recalled how the firefly light had affected Charlie. Noah said, With all that light, Charlie changed. Mr. Darby turned to Noah, one eyebrow raised. How so? His arms, they weren't so freakishly long anymore, and his freckles looked normal. Everyone was now listening. Even the descenders in the other room were staring at Noah through the wall that appeared to be invisible. But Charlie walks around in the light all the time, Mr. Darby said. The Sasquatches too. Yeah, but not DeGraff. He also got hit by the light. Mr. Darby held his gaze on Noah. What are you trying to say? Noah looked around the room. The Specters, the Descenders, his sister. All the animals and people are like DeGraff's prisoners. Would bringing down DeGraff free them? Council has raised this question before, Mr. Darby said. We've never seen evidence to suggest this would work. I saw evidence, Noah said. Tonight. Charlie changed. I saw that. Mr. Darby considered this some more. After a few seconds, he said, Charlie already has a wicked heart. Yeah, Charlie does, but not the others. Even the Sasquatches. They're unruly, but they're not evil. Mr. Darby glanced at Zach, as if to see what he was thinking. Then he looked at Lily, Solana, Sam. Tonight wasn't the first time I saw how the light hurts DeGraff, Noah added. I saw it in the Chamber of Lights. The flashlight fish. They started shining all at once, and DeGraff dropped to his knees. Noah looked at his sister and said, Remember? Megan nodded. What if we filled the secret zoo with light? So much light that DeGraff couldn't escape into the shadows again. And how do we do that, bro? Zach asked. He motioned to the gateway and the stormy streets behind it. Noah shrugged. Do you have something, Zach? Some kind of device that can shine light everywhere? Zack shook his head. Noah turned and faced the curtain, which was still blowing in the wind. He looked into the dark, foggy streets of the city of species. Shadowy animals were stalking around, and it chilled him to know that they could see him. He saw the silhouettes of buildings and tall trees, and winding loops of glass water slide that descended from the water tower. Across the street stood a small, familiar shop. Noah squinted for a closer look and realized it was Lots of Latte, the coffee shop where, a few days ago, Mr. Darby had given the Specters instructions for rescuing Tank and the Descenders. He stood, wincing in pain in his hand, and when he used it for support, he slowly walked across the living room, his gaze fixed on the coffee shop and a sudden flurry of ideas in his head. He noticed the wall between the kitchen and the living room, or the absence of the wall, really. The chameleons, their magic. "I have an idea," he said. Everyone stood still and listened. And I'll stop the video there, ending chapter 15. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video today, and as always, I thank you so much for watching. Again, I wish you guys all a very blessed and happy New Year, and I look forward to seeing you as we continue the Secret Zoo, the final fight. But as always, take good care and be safe.